Documentation is an important step in the preservation and interpretation of historic sites. When we document a structure, we are capturing it as a tangible, material piece of historical evidence. Therefore, a detailed representation of the structure itself is necessary. Documentation essentially involves reading the building as one would a text or image. We look at the basic form of a structure, but also for specific architectural details, changes, and discontinuities. Preservationists have outlined a three-step process to identify the visual character of a historic structure. Step one is to look at the overall visual aspects, the shape of the building, the roof line, openings, the overall appearance, its placement in the landscape, and so forth. This is the step at which you would identify the housing type, for instance, or the style of the roof line, whether something is a Georgian-style structure or some other vernacular form, the facade, shape, the number of windows and doors and their placement, and so forth. Step two looks at the visual character of the structure at close range, studying and noting ornamentation and other details, construction techniques, what materials are used in the construction of the buildings, such as wood, stone, concrete, glass. You might notice the use of native materials such as regional stone types or wood timbers from local forests. You could identify joining techniques, whether through the use of pegs or dovetail joints, nails, and other fasteners. And then the third step is to look at the interior spaces, features, and finishes. Here you would study the interior of the structure and you would note decorative motifs, finishes such as symbols on fireplaces, moldings or carvings, and things like faux finishes, marble, wallpaper, or other decorative elements like sconces, door handles, hinges, any other crafted element. You might also look at things like cornerstones, which often have dates of construction, or cast iron elements, which sometimes indicate the foundry name and location. So again, a really close reading of the building as if you would do a close reading of a text. Now, one really example of this kind of close reading is the Historic American Buildings Survey, and a lot of the images in this presentation and in other presentations I've shown you this semester come from HABS. HABS is administered by the National Park Service, and all of the documents generated by HABS are also held at the Library of Congress. Using multi-format surveys, more than 581,000 measured drawings have been created of over 43,000 historic structures across the country. And so this is a really important source of information about historic buildings, and often we can look to that not only as a model for how to document a building, but also for information about many buildings, documentation that's already been done. The cornerstone of documentation is, of course, visual documentation of the structure, and measured drawings are the tried and true way to document. These drawings have their origin in fieldwork and are prepared in two steps. First, rough sketches are made at the site, including floor plans, elevations, and as many architectural details as can be captured, usually using graph paper to retain scale. And you can see an example of a field sketch is on the top image there. You can see it's a little rougher, but still the measurements have been done to scale. Measurements are read off as running dimensions using a long tape measure to capture distances to doors, windows, and other elements on one wall read without moving the tape. So you secure it in one spot, and then you run it along the wall to create your measurements. The second step is to generate from the field sketches hardline drawings. These are done in permanent ink, traditionally hand-drawn on Mylar drafting film, although these days people are more likely to use computer-generated drawing software like CAD. In this visual documentation, which can also include photographs, there are several key elements that are usually present. A floor plan, back, side, and front elevations, architectural details including ornamentation, construction techniques and materials, and then building conditions, and in particular, changes to the building over time. So let's take a look at some examples of structural documentation. Here we have the Johnson House. This is from HABS. It's located in the Germantown neighborhood of Northwest Philadelphia. The house was built in 1768 and occupied by successive generations of Quakers, including those who utilized the house as a station on the Underground Railroad during the early 19th century. Here we have photographs of the house itself and a sketch of the unique orientation of the structure on the street block. This is the first step. So here we have photographs of the exterior, including specific architectural details. Also, drawings of the floor plan, every floor of the house, including basements and attics. Front, back, and side elevations of the house. Again, this is where you can really get a sense of the facades, the windows and doors and so forth, the placement in the overall house form. And this, of course, if you look at it closely, is pretty much a really typical Georgian house form, which tracks considering that it was done in the 1760s. We also have drawings and photographs of that document construction elements. Here we have door and window frames, fireplaces, cornices, and other architectural details, all documented in specifically to scale. And you can see that in very much detail. We even know what the molding looks like in this house. We want to document construction elements. Here we see sketches and photographs of techniques of wood framing in historic English cottages, specifically roof timber framing. We also want to document the building condition and the ways in which buildings have changed over time, such as remodels, expansions, add-ons, and other changes to the floor plan or structure. Things to look for inside include things like blocked-in doors and windows, scarfed beams, breaks in molding, or ghost images of previous use or material. So sometimes you might see a shadow or a ghost image of something that was where a wall was or where molding was placed and so forth. And this will give you a sense that a change has been made in the structure. These are extremely common, especially in residential structures where often changes, especially when the farther you go back in history, are often not documented in the same way that they are in commercial structures. Here are two examples, also from English cottages. Here's Low Park in Cambria, and the drawings show how the building was added onto over time, how doors, placement of doors were changed, and other kinds of changes were made to the structure. This is Laverock Hall Farm in Yorkshire, and this rural cottage underwent significant change over time. And you can see that from the additional structure, there were additions here of doorways, also additive things added on the structure. You can even see this also in the shape of the building as well. You can see, you could kind of map externally and then also internally the changes to this cottage over time. Finally, documentation can be done through 3D scanning and modeling. In this approach, high-definition surveys can also be done with 3D scanning to capture via a digital camera the existing condition of the building in minute detail. One can map a complete surface with multiple scans combined to a 3D cloud which can interface with AutoCAD and other engineering or design software to create drawings. And Chad Keller will be joining us on September 30th to specifically discuss this approach. I won't say any more about it right now. You can hear more about it from him. All of these techniques can be used to generate a historic structure report, which establishes a baseline portrait to guide the restoration of any building. The Historic Structural Report offers a twofold narrative of the structure's developmental history and recommendations for treatment and use. And it's supplemented with a wide range of documentation. The first historic structure report was of Moore House, the site of the surrender at Yorktown, and that's the house there in the upper left-hand corner. This was the first HSR that was done in 1935. But you can find historic structure reports on almost any building or site that's been preserved or restored. And in fact, we have a number of historic structure reports that were done by graduate students in GSU's Heritage Preservation Program, and you can find those on GSU's website in ScholarWorks, and there's an example of one of those on the right. If we look at an actual historic structure report, here's one that was done on the Wisconsin State Capitol in 2004. We can see, through looking at the table of contents, some of the things that are in a historic structural report, including things like a historic overview, descriptions of the site, the structural systems of the building, exterior, interior artwork, decorative finishes, In this case, the historic structure report even goes into the heating and cooling systems and other systematic parts of the building because, of course, it's a large institutional building. We have historical context on the building, details on the exterior, both photographic and here are some of the original blueprint sketches for the site, also included in the historic structure report, and also an examination of interior ornamentation, including things like coffers in the Capitol Dome, other kinds of ornamentation, and even things like furnishings. So we see the fabric that was used to upholster the seats in the assembly room, for instance. And then finally, most historic structure reports, like this one, offer specific recommendations for preservation of the building, which include not only addressing any particular structural or other condition issues that might be there, but also specific aspects of artwork or some other feature that would need to be restored. And often these recommendations include both short-term recommendations, which might be, say, for the stabilization of a deteriorating structure, and long-term recommendations in terms of a longer preservation plan for the building.